Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that'll make your worst Tinder dates look like fairy tales. Picture this. You're a young Roman, and your parents just announced they've found you the perfect match. The catch: you've never met them, they're twice your age, and the whole arrangement hinges on how many goats your family owns. Welcome to dating in ancient Rome, where swiping right meant agreeing to a business merger disguised as romance. You think modern dating apps are brutal? Try navigating a world where your love life was decided by spreadsheets of dowries and political connections. Through the next few minutes, you'll discover why Roman romance was basically a high-stakes game of chess played with human hearts. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive the emotional carnage. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're watching this. I love seeing where our sleepy history buffs are scattered around the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the atrium of a wealthy Roman villa, marble floors cool beneath your sandals, when your father approaches with that particular expression that means your life is about to change forever. He's holding a wax tablet covered in neat Latin script, your future spouse's credentials, laid out like a resume for eternity. "Congratulations," he announces, not asking if you want congratulations. "The Claudius family has accepted our proposal. Their daughter Livia will make an excellent addition to our household." You've seen Livia exactly once, at a religious festival 6 months ago, from across a crowded temple. She seemed pleasant enough, though you couldn't tell much from that distance, and the fact that she was completely veiled. This is matchmaking madness at its finest, and you're about to discover just how little your personal preferences matter in the grand Roman scheme of love. Your parents have been conducting marriage negotiations like seasoned diplomats, exchanging letters about property holdings, family bloodlines, and social standing. Love. That's what poets write about. Real Romans focus on practical matters like increasing their political influence and combining estates. The process began months ago, probably while you were blissfully unaware, studying rhetoric or learning to manage the family's olive groves. Your father identified suitable families through his network of business associates and political allies. He consulted with marriage brokers, professional matchmakers who maintained detailed records of eligible young Romans and their families' assets. These brokers functioned like ancient dating consultants, except instead of personality compatibility, they focused on dowry calculations and bloodline purity. Your mother, meanwhile, had been conducting her own intelligence operations through the complex web of Roman female social networks. At dinner parties and religious ceremonies, she gathered crucial information about potential matches, their family's reputation, health history, and any scandals that might affect your future children's prospects. Roman mothers were basically ancient private investigators when it came to vetting future in-laws. The negotiations themselves followed strict protocols that would make modern business mergers look casual. Both families exchanged detailed financial statements, listing property holdings, slave inventories, and expected inheritance shares. Your father presented certificates proving your family's citizenship status, military service records, and character references from respected citizens. Historians still argue whether this bureaucratic approach to marriage actually produced happier unions, but one thing's certain: it eliminated most romantic surprises. What strikes you as particularly absurd is how little input you have in this process that will define the rest of your existence. Sure, you can technically refuse a match, but rejecting your parents' choice means explaining why you think their judgment is flawed. That's a conversation no sensible Roman teenager wants to have, especially when family honor hangs in the balance. The age factor adds another layer of awkwardness to this matchmaking madness. If you're a young Roman woman, you're probably being matched around age 14 to 16, while your intended husband might be anywhere from his late 20s to his 40s. Roman law technically required you to be 12 before marriage, though most respectable families waited until you were at least 14. Your parents justify this age gap by explaining that older husbands provide stability and established households, while younger wives adapt more easily to their new family's customs. Economic considerations dominate every aspect of these arrangements. Your dowry, the property and money your family provides to your husband's family, has been calculated down to the last sestertius. It includes not just gold and silver, but also clothing, jewelry, household goods, and sometimes even slaves specially trained for your personal service. Your future husband's family has countered with promises about your living arrangements, yearly allowances, and what happens to your dowry if you die childless. The strangest part is how everyone pretends this elaborate business transaction is actually about your happiness. Your relatives keep mentioning how well-suited you and your intended spouse are, based on astrological charts and family temperaments they've analyzed. They speak confidently about your future compatibility, despite the fact that you've never had a real conversation with your betrothed. Roman matchmaking also involves complex calculations about social mobility and political advancement. Your parents aren't just finding you a spouse, they're positioning your family for the next generation's success. Marriage connections determine which dinner parties you'll attend, which business opportunities will be available, and whether your future children will have access to prestigious careers in law, politics, or the military. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you simply refused to participate in this system, but you know the answer. Rejecting marriage means rejecting your role in Roman society entirely. Unmarried adults are viewed with suspicion and pity, unable to fulfill their basic civic duties of producing legitimate heirs and maintaining family traditions. As you stand there holding your betrothal contract, you realize this is just the beginning of a months-long process that will culminate in a wedding ceremony you'll have minimal control over. Your engagement period will be filled with formal meetings, gift exchanges, and increasingly detailed negotiations about everything from household management to child-rearing philosophies. The truly maddening aspect of Roman matchmaking is how it masquerades as romantic destiny while being utterly practical. Everyone involved speaks about divine favor and auspicious signs, but the real decisions are based on tax assessments and political alliances. You're entering a marriage that's been designed by committee, optimized for social stability rather than personal fulfillment. Welcome to Roman romance, where love is a luxury and marriage is a career move that will define your family's future for generations. The marriage contract is barely dry when you discover your first major problem. The rigid social hierarchy that governs every aspect of Roman life extends into your romantic future. You're not just marrying another person. You're attempting to navigate a complex class system where one wrong move can destroy your family's reputation for generations. Roman society operates on a carefully maintained ladder of social status, and dating outside your designated rung isn't just discouraged, it's potentially catastrophic. At the top sit the patricians, the ancient noble families who trace their lineage back to Rome's founding. Below them, the plebeians range from wealthy merchants and successful politicians down to small farmers and shopkeepers. At the bottom, freedmen and slaves occupy positions that make romantic relationships with citizens legally complicated or entirely forbidden. Your parents didn't just choose your spouse based on dowry calculations. They conducted extensive research into your intended family's social standing, going back several generations. They consulted family genealogies, verified citizenship records, and cross-referenced political appointments to ensure no embarrassing surprises would emerge after the wedding. This background investigation makes modern security clearances look casual. The consequences of marrying beneath your station are swift and merciless. Roman society has a long memory for social transgressions, and families who allow their children to marry down find themselves gradually excluded from elite social circles. Dinner party invitations dry up, business partnerships dissolve, and political opportunities vanish. Your children inherit not just your combined wealth, but also your combined social standing, or lack thereof. But here's where it gets particularly twisted. The rules aren't the same for everyone. Wealthy plebeian families can sometimes marry into declining patrician houses, essentially buying their way up the social ladder through strategic marriages and massive dowries. Meanwhile, patrician families facing financial difficulties might reluctantly accept these arrangements, trading their ancient names for fresh capital. The hypocrisy is staggering, but nobody discusses it openly. Women face especially complex challenges in this social ladder-climbing game. A patrician woman who marries a plebeian husband technically retains her superior birth status, but her children's prospects are limited by their father's lower rank. Conversely, a plebeian woman marrying into a patrician family gains social elevation, but she'll spend her entire married life proving she belongs in her new social circle. The most absurd aspect of this system is how it creates elaborate social performance requirements for young Romans navigating courtship. You can't simply be yourself during the extended engagement process. You must constantly demonstrate that you understand and can maintain your family's social position. This means mastering complex etiquette rules, displaying appropriate cultural knowledge, and avoiding any behavior that might suggest you're not worthy of your current status. Historians still argue whether this rigid social stratification actually strengthened Roman society, or just created unnecessary anxiety for young people trying to find compatible partners. What's certain is that it generated enormous pressure on families to maintain their positions while simultaneously seeking opportunities for advancement through marriage. The enforcement mechanisms for these social boundaries are both subtle and brutal. Roman society relies heavily on gossip and reputation management, meaning that even minor social missteps become public knowledge within days. If you're caught flirting with someone beneath your station, the news spreads through social networks faster than plague rumors. Your family's reputation suffers immediate damage, and your future marriage prospects are severely compromised. Economic factors complicate this social ladder system even further. Some plebeian families have accumulated wealth that far exceeds that of traditional patrician houses, creating awkward situations where financial power conflicts with social hierarchy. These newly wealthy families often use their resources to arrange marriages that gradually elevate their status over several generations, playing a long-term game of social advancement. The military adds another layer of complexity to Roman social climbing through marriage. Successful generals and war heroes can transcend their birth status through exceptional service, making them attractive marriage prospects despite their humble origins. Veterans who have accumulated wealth through conquest and plunder suddenly find themselves welcome in social circles that would have rejected them before their military success. Provincial families face unique challenges in this social hierarchy. Romans living in distant territories often develop their own local elite networks, but these rarely translate into status recognition back in Rome itself. A family that's considered high society in Gaul or Spain might find themselves treated as provincial upstarts when they attempt to arrange marriages with established Roman families. The legal framework surrounding Roman marriage reflects these social distinctions in ways that seem almost designed to create confusion. Citizens can only marry other citizens, but citizenship itself exists in various categories with different privileges and restrictions. Some freed slaves become citizens but face legal limitations on whom they can marry and what offices their children can hold. Religious considerations add yet another dimension to this social ladder navigation. Certain prestigious priestly positions are reserved for patrician families, while other religious roles are open to plebeians. Marriage connections to families holding important religious offices can provide social advancement opportunities, but they also come with complex ritual obligations and behavioral expectations. The patron-client relationship system creates additional complications for marriage arrangements. Powerful families maintain networks of dependent clients who owe them loyalty and service. Marriage connections can either strengthen these relationships or create conflicts of interest, particularly when client families attempt to marry above their traditional station. Regional variations in social hierarchy create confusion for families trying to arrange marriages across different parts of the empire. Status markers that matter in Rome might be irrelevant in Egypt or Greece, while local elite families in those provinces might not understand or respect traditional Roman social distinctions. You're beginning to realize that Roman courtship isn't just about finding someone compatible. It's about successfully navigating a minefield of social expectations, while avoiding the career-ending mistake of falling for someone whose family background doesn't align with your predetermined social trajectory. Every conversation, now that you've survived the matchmaking process and navigated the social hierarchy, you face the truly bewildering world of Roman courtship etiquette. Every gesture, every gift, every word must follow protocols so complex they make modern diplomatic ceremonies look casual. You're about to discover that Roman romance is essentially a months-long performance where improvisation can destroy your reputation. The courting ritual begins with formal introductions orchestrated by both families, usually in a public setting like a religious festival or family gathering. You don't just walk up to your intended spouse and introduce yourself. That would be scandalously improper. Instead, senior family members perform elaborate ceremonial presentations, reciting both families' accomplishments and explaining how this union serves the greater good of Roman society. Gift-giving during courtship follows rules so specific they require careful study. As the prospective groom, you're expected to present your intended bride with tokens of esteem that demonstrate your wealth and good taste without appearing too extravagant or too modest. The traditional gifts include fine jewelry, expensive perfumes, decorative mirrors, and beautifully crafted writing implements. But here's the catch. Each gift carries symbolic meaning that both families will analyze and discuss. A gold bracelet suggests you view the relationship as permanent and valuable. Pearls indicate you consider her pure and precious. Expensive unguents show you appreciate her beauty and want to enhance it. But choose incorrectly, and you'll send unintended messages. Giving a ring too early implies you're rushing toward marriage improperly. Presenting flowers suggests you view the relationship as temporary and decorative rather than serious. Your intended bride has her own gift-giving obligations that are equally fraught with potential disasters. She might send you books of poetry, demonstrating her education and cultural sophistication. She could offer handmade items like embroidered clothing or woven belts, showing her domestic skills and dedication. Sometimes she'll present you with small bronze figurines or cameos, indicating her artistic taste and family's refinement. The timing of these gift exchanges is crucial. Too frequent, and you appear desperate or inappropriate. Too rare, and you seem uninterested or disrespectful. The gifts must escalate in value and intimacy as the courtship progresses, following a careful choreography that both families monitor closely. Chaperone meetings are mandatory throughout the entire courtship process, and the chaperone arrangements are almost as complex as the courtship itself. Your families must agree on suitable supervisors, usually older relatives known for their discretion and moral authority. These chaperones don't just observe. They actively participate in conversations, steering discussions toward appropriate topics and intervening if interactions become too intimate. The approved topics for courtship conversations are surprisingly limited. You can discuss literature, particularly epic poetry and moral philosophy. Religious observances and festival celebrations are safe subjects. Family histories and ancestral achievements are encouraged, but you must avoid anything too personal, controversial, or passionate. Discussions about your individual hopes, fears, or feelings are considered inappropriate until much later in the engagement process. Physical interaction during courtship is regulated down to the smallest gesture. Hand-holding is permitted only during specific ceremonial moments, like religious observances or formal betrothal rituals. Eye contact should be frequent enough to show interest, but not so intense as to suggest improper desire. Walking together is acceptable if properly chaperoned and conducted in public spaces, but private meetings are absolutely forbidden. The letter-writing component of Roman courtship creates its own minefield of potential mistakes. If you're literate enough to compose your own correspondence, you must master the appropriate language and tone for each stage of the relationship. Early letters should focus on mutual respect and family honor. Later correspondence can include carefully worded expressions of affection, but nothing too passionate or specific. Many Romans hire professional scribes or educated slaves to compose their courtship letters, creating an entire industry around romantic ghostwriting. These professional letter writers maintain collections of appropriate phrases and sentiments for different stages of courtship, essentially providing template responses for various romantic situations. The irony is that your most personal communications might be written by someone who's never met your intended spouse. Poetry presents particular challenges during Roman courtship. You're expected to appreciate and discuss classical love poetry, but composing your own verses requires careful attention to propriety. Your poems should express admiration and devotion without crossing into explicit passion or inappropriate desire. Many young Romans memorize appropriate classical selections rather than risk composing something that might be misinterpreted. Public appearances during courtship are carefully orchestrated social performances. When you attend festivals, theatrical performances, or gladiatorial games together, your behavior is scrutinized by everyone present. You must demonstrate appropriate affection without appearing overly familiar. Your clothing choices, conversation topics, and even where you sit are all subject to social judgment. The engagement ceremony itself is an elaborate ritual with specific requirements for dress, gifts, and religious observances. Both families must agree on appropriate sacrifices to ensure divine favor. The betrothal ring ceremony includes precise wording that has legal implications for property rights and divorce settlements. Even the feast menu requires careful consideration to avoid foods that might be considered too luxurious or too simple for the occasion. Historians still argue whether these elaborate courtship rituals actually helped couples get to know each other, or just created artificial barriers to genuine connection. What's clear is that the system prioritized social stability over individual compatibility, assuming that couples who could successfully navigate these complex protocols would be able to handle marriage's challenges. The most frustrating aspect of Roman courtship etiquette is its emphasis on performance over authenticity. You're not really getting to know your future spouse. You're both demonstrating your ability to follow social scripts and maintain family honor. The person you'll marry might be completely different from the carefully constructed persona they've presented during the courtship process. By the time you've mastered all these protocols, your wedding day is approaching, and you realize you've spent months learning to be the perfect Roman fiancé without discovering whether you actually like the person you're about to marry. Welcome to the courting ritual minefield, where following the rules perfectly is more important than finding genuine compatibility. You've navigated the matchmaking chaos, climbed the social ladder, and survived the courtship etiquette minefield. Now comes perhaps the most terrifying expectation of Roman romance. You're supposed to write poetry. Not just any poetry. Eloquent, passionate, culturally sophisticated verses that demonstrate your education, creativity, and deep emotional capacity. The pressure is absolutely crushing, especially when you consider that most Romans could barely write a grocery list, let alone compose romantic literature. The expectation for poetic courtship stems from the popularity of famous love poets like Catullus and Ovid, whose works set impossibly high standards for romantic expression. Every educated Roman knows their verses by heart, and young lovers are expected to either quote classical masters appropriately or compose original works that demonstrate similar literary skill. It's like being required to paint the Sistine Chapel when you've never held a brush. If you're fortunate enough to be literate, and that's a big if, since literacy rates hover around 10% for the general population, you still face the daunting challenge of mastering complex poetic forms. Roman love poetry follows strict metrical patterns like elegiac couplets or hendecasyllables, requiring not just creativity but technical expertise that takes years to develop. You need to understand classical mythology, historical references, and literary conventions that most Romans learned through expensive private tutoring. The ghostwriting industry flourishes precisely because of this impossible standard. Wealthy families routinely hire educated slaves or professional scribes to compose romantic correspondence and poetry for their children. These literary consultants maintain extensive libraries of appropriate quotes, customizable verse templates, and stock romantic imagery that can be adapted for specific courtship situations. What makes this particularly absurd is that everyone knows most romantic poetry is ghostwritten, but nobody acknowledges it directly. Your intended bride receives your carefully crafted verses praising her beauty and virtue, fully aware that you probably didn't write them yourself, while you nervously hope she doesn't ask about specific literary references you've never actually read. The subjects and themes of Roman love poetry follow predictable patterns that become increasingly ridiculous when you try to personalize them. You're expected to compare your beloved to various mythological figures: Diana for her chastity, Venus for her beauty, Minerva for her wisdom, regardless of whether these comparisons make any sense for the actual person you're courting. Every Roman woman in love poetry apparently has skin like marble, eyes like stars, and hair like spun gold, creating a literary landscape populated entirely by identical goddesses. Male romantic poetry follows equally formulaic patterns. You must present yourself as both passionately devoted and respectfully restrained, desperately in love but properly civilized. Your verses should demonstrate your willingness to die for love, while also proving your stability and reliability as a future husband. This emotional contradiction creates poetry that sounds like it was written by committee, which, in many cases, it literally was. The classical allusions required for proper Roman love poetry create their own educational challenges. Your verses should reference appropriate mythological stories, but only ones that support your romantic narrative without suggesting inappropriate parallels. Mentioning Paris and Helen might demonstrate your classical knowledge, but it also brings up adultery and war. Referencing Orpheus and Eurydice shows your sensitivity to tragic love, but it implies your relationship might be doomed. Regional variations in poetic taste add another layer of complexity to romantic correspondence. Couples from different parts of the empire might have different literary traditions and cultural references. A young Roman woman educated in Greek classics might not appreciate Latin verse forms, while someone from a military family might prefer poetry that emphasizes duty and honor over passion and beauty. The performance aspect of romantic poetry creates additional anxiety for young Romans. Love poems aren't just written, they're recited at family gatherings, social events, and religious ceremonies. You need to memorize your verses convincingly and deliver them with appropriate emotional expression. Even if you didn't write them and don't entirely understand their literary significance. Professional poetry tutors become essential for families serious about their children's romantic prospects. These educators teach not just composition techniques, but also proper recitation, classical references, and how to analyze and respond to poetry received from potential spouses. The lessons cover everything from scansion and meter to the subtle art of plagiarizing classical masters without being obvious about it. The legal implications of romantic poetry add unexpected complications to courtship correspondence. Love poems can be used as evidence in betrothal disputes, divorce proceedings, or inheritance challenges. Overly passionate verses might be interpreted as promises of specific behavior or financial commitments. Conservative families sometimes require their children's romantic poetry to be reviewed by legal advisors before it's sent. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on poetic courtship actually enhanced romantic relationships or just created artificial barriers to genuine communication. Some evidence suggests that couples who shared genuine literary interests developed stronger marriages, while others indicate that the pressure to perform poetically discouraged authentic emotional expression. The most frustrating aspect of Roman poetry pressure is how it prioritizes literary sophistication over emotional honesty. You might have genuine feelings for your intended spouse, but expressing them requires mastering cultural codes and artistic conventions that have nothing to do with your actual relationship. The result is a courtship conducted entirely in borrowed language, using other people's words to express emotions you might not even be allowed to feel authentically. Female poets face additional challenges in this system. While some Roman women received excellent educations and composed sophisticated verse, social expectations limited their poetic subjects and styles. Women's love poetry was supposed to emphasize virtue, devotion, and domestic happiness rather than passion or individual desire. Female poets who wrote too boldly about love risked damaging their reputations and marriage prospects. The pressure to write or commission impressive poetry creates an arms race among Roman families, with each trying to outdo others in literary sophistication and emotional expression. Courtship correspondence becomes increasingly elaborate and artificial, as couples compete to demonstrate their cultural refinement rather than their personal compatibility. By the time you've mastered the art of romantic poetry, or found someone skilled enough to master it for you, you realize that your entire courtship has been conducted in a language that bears little resemblance to how you actually think or feel. Well, you've written the poetry, navigated the social expectations, and survived the formal courtship rituals. Now comes the truly mortifying reality of Roman romance. Everything happens in public. Forget about intimate candlelit dinners or private walks in the garden. Roman dating unfolds under the constant scrutiny of an entire society that treats your love life like their personal entertainment. The forum becomes your primary dating venue, that sprawling public square where all of Roman life converges in a chaotic mix of politics, commerce, and social networking. You attempt to have meaningful conversations with your intended spouse while surrounded by shouting merchants, arguing lawyers, and curious neighbors who aren't even pretending not to eavesdrop on your romantic discussions. Privacy doesn't exist in Roman society, and courtship certainly doesn't get any special exemption from this rule. Religious festivals provide approved opportunities for young couples to spend time together, but these events are essentially community-wide social gatherings where your behavior is monitored by hundreds of observers. You're trying to build a romantic connection during the Saturnalia celebrations, while elderly relatives critique your conversation topics and unmarried friends analyze every gesture for signs of improper intimacy. It's like trying to fall in love on a reality television show, except the entire Roman Empire is your audience. The public baths present particularly awkward challenges for courtship. These elaborate social centers serve as gathering places where Romans conduct business, gossip about politics, and observe social hierarchies in action. Young couples might encounter each other at the baths, but the segregated facilities and constant supervision make meaningful interaction nearly impossible. You catch glimpses of your intended spouse across crowded pools, while trying to maintain appropriate decorum in front of family chaperones and curious strangers. Gladiatorial games become unlikely romantic venues, where couples attend brutal spectacles together as a form of approved entertainment. You're supposed to bond with your future spouse over watching people fight to the death, making small talk about combat techniques while demonstrating your shared Roman values. The crowd's bloodthirsty enthusiasm creates a surreal backdrop for romance, as you attempt intimate conversation during the brief intermissions between violent contests. Theater performances offer slightly more civilized dating opportunities, but even these cultural events are deeply public experiences. You sit in designated sections based on your social status, surrounded by family members and community observers who pay as much attention to audience behavior as to the stage performance. Your reactions to dramatic scenes, your appreciation for comic timing, and your conversations during intermissions all become subject to public analysis and discussion. Market days transform routine shopping into courtship opportunities, as young couples browse vendor stalls under the watchful eyes of family chaperones. You're trying to learn about each other's preferences and tastes while navigating crowded marketplaces filled with aggressive merchants and curious neighbors. Every purchase becomes a statement about your character and priorities, analyzed by observers who treat your shopping choices as insights into your compatibility as a couple. The most absurd aspect of public courtship is how it turns ordinary Romans into amateur relationship counselors and social critics. Strangers feel entitled to offer unsolicited advice about your romantic choices, comment on your compatibility with your intended spouse, and share their opinions about your family's marriage arrangements. Your love life becomes a community discussion topic, debated by people who barely know you but feel qualified to judge your romantic decisions. Dinner parties hosted by extended family create mandatory social performances where couples must demonstrate their developing relationship to assembled guests. You're expected to show appropriate affection without appearing overly familiar, engage in witty conversation that entertains the company, and display cultural sophistication that reflects well on both families. These events feel less like romantic opportunities and more like job interviews conducted in front of multiple panels of judges. Walking through Roman streets together requires careful attention to public behavior standards. You must maintain appropriate physical distance, avoid excessive eye contact, and conduct conversations that won't scandalize passing pedestrians. Even your route choices are subject to scrutiny. Visiting certain neighborhoods or businesses might send unintended messages about your character or intentions. Historians still argue whether this public nature of Roman courtship actually strengthened relationships by ensuring community support, or just created artificial pressure that prevented authentic connection. What's certain is that Roman couples had virtually no opportunity to discover their private compatibility before marriage, since privacy itself was a luxury that even wealthy families couldn't purchase. The legal framework surrounding Roman marriage reflects this public nature of courtship. Betrothals and weddings require witnesses, community recognition, and formal documentation precisely because marriage is considered a public institution rather than a private relationship. Your romantic choices affect not just your personal happiness, but also community stability, property rights, and political alliances. Regional variations in public behavior expectations create additional complications for couples from different parts of the empire. Courtship practices considered acceptable in cosmopolitan Rome might be scandalous in conservative provincial towns, while rural customs might seem primitive to urban sophisticates. Couples must navigate these cultural differences while under public observation by communities that might have conflicting behavioral standards. The patron-client relationship system ensures that even your most private romantic moments are subject to political considerations. Your family's supporters and dependents have vested interests in your marriage choices, since wedding alliances affect the entire network of social and economic relationships. Your courtship becomes a public relations exercise designed to strengthen your family's position within these complex social hierarchies. Religious considerations add another layer of public scrutiny to Roman romance. Priests and religious officials monitor courtship behavior for signs of divine favor or displeasure, interpreting omens and signs that might affect your marriage prospects. Your romantic relationship becomes a subject of religious discussion, with community leaders offering prayers and sacrifices to ensure your union receives appropriate divine blessing. The most frustrating aspect of public courtship is how it prioritizes social performance over genuine emotional connection. You're not really getting to know your intended spouse. You're both learning to present yourselves as ideal Roman couples for public consumption. The relationship you develop during courtship might bear little resemblance to the private partnership you'll need to create after marriage. By the time you reach your wedding day, you realize you've spent months performing romance for an audience rather than actually building a relationship with. You've survived the public courtship spectacle, but now you face the true marathon of Roman romance, the engagement period. What should be an exciting time of anticipation becomes a months-long endurance test of superstitions, religious obligations, and family interference that would drive any modern couple to elope. Welcome to wedding planning, Roman style, where every decision requires consulting the gods, interpreting omens, and navigating enough traditions to fill a small library. The moment your betrothal becomes official, both families spring into action with planning activities that make contemporary wedding preparations look simple. Your mothers begin consulting with professional wedding planners, usually experienced matrons who specialize in orchestrating these elaborate ceremonies. These planners maintain detailed calendars of auspicious dates, lists of required religious observances, and connections with vendors who provide everything from sacrificial animals to imported flowers. Choosing your wedding date becomes an exercise in ancient astronomy and religious calendar management. You can't simply pick a convenient Saturday. Roman weddings must occur during specific time periods when the gods are believed to favor matrimonial unions. The month of June is traditionally preferred because it's sacred to Juno, goddess of marriage. But even within favorable months, certain days are considered unlucky for weddings. Your families consult with augurs, professional fortune tellers who interpret divine signs, to identify the most auspicious wedding date. These religious specialists examine bird flight patterns, analyze sacrificial entrails, and study celestial movements to determine when the gods will smile upon your union. The process can take weeks, and if the omens are unfavorable, your wedding might be postponed indefinitely while everyone waits for divine approval. The superstitions surrounding Roman wedding planning are absolutely overwhelming. You must avoid getting married during certain months that are considered cursed, like May, which is associated with death and the underworld. Rainy days are generally considered bad luck, but gentle spring showers might be interpreted as signs of fertility and abundance. Even the day of the week matters, with some being more favorable than others according to ancient traditions. Your wedding preparations include elaborate purification rituals that must be performed correctly to ensure divine blessing. Both bride and groom undergo ceremonial cleansing processes, including special baths with prescribed herbs and oils. These rituals often require multiple sessions over several weeks, with specific prayers and offerings made to different deities who govern various aspects of marriage and fertility. The clothing requirements for Roman weddings involve complex symbolic elements that must be assembled months in advance. The bride's dress includes specific colors and fabrics that represent purity and fertility, while the groom's attire must demonstrate his status and readiness for adult responsibilities. Each garment component has symbolic meaning, from the bride's veil to the groom's belt, and obtaining authentic materials often requires importing specialized textiles from distant provinces. Gift-giving between families escalates dramatically during the engagement period, with each side trying to demonstrate their respect and commitment through increasingly elaborate presents. These exchanges follow strict protocols about timing, value, and symbolic meaning. The gifts aren't just personal tokens, they're public statements about each family's wealth, taste, and social standing. Your families begin extensive negotiations about the wedding ceremony itself, debating everything from guest lists to menu selections. These discussions often become heated diplomatic sessions, as different family traditions clash and compromise solutions must be found. The bride's family might prefer certain regional customs, while the groom's family insists on their own ancestral practices. The religious requirements for Roman weddings are staggeringly complex. You must arrange for appropriate sacrifices to multiple deities, each requiring specific animals, rituals, and ceremonial procedures. The costs add up quickly, as quality sacrificial animals are expensive, and the ceremonies require professional priests who charge substantial fees for their services. Historians still argue whether these elaborate wedding preparations actually strengthened marriages by ensuring community investment in the couple's success, or just created unnecessary stress that started relationships off on the wrong foot. What's certain is that many engagements ended during the planning process, as families discovered they couldn't agree on basic ceremonial elements. The most maddening aspect of Roman wedding planning is how it prioritizes religious and social obligations over the couple's personal preferences. You might have specific ideas about your wedding celebration, but family traditions, religious requirements, and community expectations override your individual desires. Your wedding becomes a public ritual designed to satisfy the gods and society rather than celebrate your personal relationship. Guest list management becomes a political nightmare during the engagement period. Your families must invite everyone who expects inclusion based on social rank, business relationships, or family connections. Leaving someone out could create lasting resentment and damage important relationships, but including everyone makes the celebration prohibitively expensive and logistically impossible. The venue selection process involves complicated negotiations about space, location, and symbolic significance. Traditional Roman weddings include ceremonies at multiple locations, religious rituals at temples, legal proceedings at family homes, and celebration feasts at appropriate venues. Coordinating these events requires months of planning and substantial financial investment. Food and entertainment planning for Roman weddings follow elaborate customs that reflect both families' social status and cultural sophistication. The feast menu must include specific dishes that symbolize fertility and abundance, while the entertainment should demonstrate the family's appreciation for refined culture. Professional musicians, dancers, and poets are hired to provide appropriate artistic performances. Your engagement period also includes educational preparation for marriage responsibilities. Young brides receive instruction in household management, religious observances, and social duties from older female relatives. Grooms learn about legal obligations, financial responsibilities, and family leadership roles from male mentors. These educational processes can be more stressful than helpful, as they emphasize the weight of matrimonial duties rather than celebrating the joy of partnership. The divination practices surrounding Roman weddings create additional anxiety for engaged couples. Families continuously seek signs about the future success of the marriage, interpreting dreams, natural phenomena, and random events as omens about the couple's compatibility and future happiness. Negative signs might require additional rituals, postponements, or even reconsideration of the entire engagement. Legal preparations for Roman marriage involve complex documentation and property arrangements that must be finalized before the wedding ceremony. Marriage contracts specify dowry terms, inheritance rights, and divorce procedures in exhaustive detail. These legal documents often require multiple revisions and negotiations between family representatives. The social pressure during the engagement period is relentless, as everyone in both families' networks feels entitled to offer advice, criticism, and unsolicited opinions about wedding plans. Distant relatives emerge from obscurity to share their thoughts about ceremonial details, while family friends compete to provide the most helpful suggestions about everything from flower arrangements to honeymoon destinations. By the time you finally reach your wedding day, you're exhausted from months of planning, stressed by constant family negotiations, and overwhelmed by religious obligations. The celebration that should mark the beginning of your married life feels more like the culmination of a complex business merger than a romantic milestone. Welcome to Roman wedding planning nightmares, where getting married requires surviving an endurance test that would challenge the most dedicated marathon runners. You thought the wedding planning was complex. Now you're diving into the truly Byzantine world of Roman marriage negotiations, where dowries are calculated with the precision of modern corporate acquisitions, and prenuptial agreements make contemporary legal documents look like grocery lists. Welcome to the financial reality of Roman romance, where love takes a backseat to property portfolios and marriage contracts resemble hostile takeover documentation. The dowry negotiation process begins months before your wedding, with both families assembling teams of financial advisors, legal experts, and property assessors who analyze every aspect of the proposed union. Your father doesn't just hand over a bag of gold. He presents detailed inventories of assets, property holdings, and future inheritance expectations that have been verified by professional appraisers and witnessed by respected citizens. Roman dowries include far more than money and jewelry. Your family's contribution might encompass agricultural land, urban properties, slaves specially trained for specific household tasks, livestock herds, business investments, and even shares in commercial enterprises. Each asset requires individual valuation, legal documentation, and transfer procedures that can take weeks to complete properly. The complexity of Roman property law makes dowry negotiations particularly challenging. Different types of assets carry different legal implications for inheritance, management rights, and divorce settlements. Your families must navigate regulations about which properties can be transferred to married women, how assets will be managed during the marriage, and what happens to various holdings if the union ends in divorce or death. Professional marriage brokers often mediate these financial negotiations, bringing expertise about current market values, legal requirements, and regional variations in dowry customs. These specialists maintain detailed records of comparable marriage settlements, helping families understand appropriate dowry levels for different social classes and economic situations. They're essentially ancient wedding planners crossed with financial advisors. Your intended husband's family presents their own financial documentation, detailing the household you'll join after marriage. This includes inventories of property holdings, business interests, slave populations, and expected inheritance from older relatives. They must demonstrate their ability to maintain your accustomed lifestyle while providing security for your future children. The negotiation process itself follows elaborate protocols designed to prevent either family from gaining unfair advantage. Both sides present their initial offers through intermediaries, who engage in careful diplomatic discussions about asset values, transfer timelines, and legal protections. These negotiations can extend for months, with multiple revisions and counterproposals before reaching acceptable terms. Legal protections for Roman wives regarding their dowries are surprisingly sophisticated, though they vary significantly based on the type of marriage contract chosen. In some arrangements, wives retain legal ownership of their dowry assets, giving them financial independence and security. In others, husbands gain management control while wives maintain inheritance rights that protect their interests if the marriage ends. The marriage contract documentation rivals modern corporate merger agreements in complexity and detail. These legal documents specify exactly which assets are included in the dowry, how they'll be managed during the marriage, what happens to various properties if children are born, and detailed procedures for asset division in case of divorce or widowhood. Historians still argue whether the elaborate dowry system actually protected women's financial interests, or just created additional barriers to marriage for families with limited resources. What's certain is that the system made marriage primarily an economic arrangement, with romantic compatibility being a secondary consideration at best. Regional variations in dowry customs create additional complications for families arranging marriages across different parts of the empire. What's considered an appropriate dowry in Rome might be excessive or inadequate in provincial areas, while local customs in Greece or Egypt might conflict with traditional Roman practices. Families must navigate these cultural differences while ensuring their arrangements comply with applicable legal requirements. The timing of dowry payments adds another layer of complexity to marriage negotiations. Some families prefer to transfer assets before the wedding ceremony, while others arrange for gradual payments over several years. These timing decisions have significant implications for tax obligations, legal protections, and family financial planning. Professional appraisers play crucial roles in dowry negotiations, evaluating everything from agricultural land productivity to slave market values. These experts must consider not just current asset values, but also future potential, maintenance costs, and market trends that might affect long-term investment returns. Their assessments often determine whether marriage negotiations succeed or fail. The social pressure surrounding dowry negotiations is intense, as families compete to demonstrate their wealth and status through increasingly elaborate financial arrangements. These competitions can drive families into debt as they attempt to provide dowries that match or exceed those of their social peers. The financial strain often affects family relationships for generations. Business partnerships and commercial investments become particularly complex components of Roman dowries. Families might transfer shares in trading enterprises, manufacturing operations, or agricultural ventures that require ongoing management and decision-making. These business arrangements often create long-term financial relationships between families that extend far beyond the marriage itself. Slave populations included in dowries require careful legal documentation and transfer procedures. These human assets must be properly registered, evaluated for skills and health, and assigned specific roles within the new household. The legal complexities of slave ownership add significant administrative burden to dowry negotiations. The insurance and risk management aspects of Roman dowries are surprisingly sophisticated. Families often arrange for guarantees and securities that protect dowry assets from various risks, including business failures, natural disasters, and political upheavals. These protective measures require additional legal documentation and financial arrangements. International marriages between Roman citizens and foreign nationals create particularly complex dowry situations. These arrangements must comply with both Roman law and local customs, often requiring multiple legal jurisdictions and currency conversions. The documentation and administrative requirements can be overwhelming for families attempting to navigate these cross-cultural financial arrangements. The tax implications of dowry transfers are substantial and often poorly understood by families focused on the immediate marriage arrangements. Roman tax law includes specific provisions for marriage-related asset transfers, but these regulations change frequently and vary by location. Families often discover significant tax obligations only after the marriage contracts have been finalized. By the time you've survived the dowry negotiation process, you realize that your marriage has become primarily a financial merger, with romantic elements being essentially optional extras. The person you're marrying has been selected based largely on their family's asset portfolio, and your future happiness depends as much on property management as on personal compatibility. Welcome to Roman dowry drama, where love is a luxury that few families can afford to prioritize over financial security. You've survived the financial negotiations and religious preparations, but now you're confronting one of the most uncomfortable aspects of Roman marriage: the age gap between spouses. While modern society debates appropriate age differences in relationships, Romans considered it perfectly normal for teenage girls to marry men old enough to be their fathers, or even grandfathers. Welcome to a world where May-December romances are the standard arrangement, not the exception. The typical Roman marriage pairs a girl aged 14 to 16 with a man in his late 20s to early 40s, creating age gaps that would raise eyebrows in contemporary society. This isn't accidental. It's a deliberate social strategy designed to maximize the husband's financial stability and social establishment, while ensuring the wife's fertility and adaptability to her new family's customs. Your 14-year-old bride has barely finished her childhood education when she's expected to take on adult responsibilities as a wife and potential mother. She's been sheltered in her father's household, learning domestic skills and basic literacy. But now she must navigate the complex social dynamics of her husband's family while adjusting to intimate relationships she's been taught to expect but not necessarily understand. The economic logic behind these age gap marriages is coldly practical. Older husbands have had time to establish their careers, accumulate property, and build social networks that can support a family. They're past the financial instability of young adulthood and ready to take on the expenses of marriage, household management, and child-rearing. From a family perspective, these arrangements make perfect sense, but the personal dynamics of these relationships create challenges that Roman society prefers not to acknowledge directly. Your teenage wife enters marriage with limited life experience and little understanding of adult relationships, while you bring decades of experience, established habits, and potentially cynical perspectives shaped by years of navigating Roman social and political networks. The power imbalances in these age gap marriages are staggering. The older husband controls all financial decisions, social connections, and household management, while the young wife must adapt to his preferences and established routines. She has little leverage to negotiate changes or express dissatisfaction, since her family has already committed to the marriage arrangement and expects her to make it work. Educational differences compound the challenges of Roman age gap marriages. Older husbands often have extensive formal education, including rhetoric, philosophy, and literature, while their young wives might have received only basic domestic training. This creates communication barriers and intellectual isolation that can persist throughout the marriage. The social circles surrounding these couples reflect the age disparities in ways that highlight the wife's disadvantaged position. The husband's friends and business associates are typically his contemporaries, mature adults with established careers and families. The young wife often struggles to find her place in these social networks, feeling out of place among older women who have years more experience managing households and raising children. Historians still argue whether Roman women actually preferred these age gap marriages for the security they provided, or simply accepted them as unavoidable social arrangements. What's documented is that many young Roman wives found creative ways to build influence within their marriages, using their fertility, social connections, and domestic management skills to gain respect and authority within their households. The fertility expectations placed on young Roman wives are intense and immediate. They're expected to produce children quickly after marriage, often while still teenagers themselves. This pressure creates additional stress for girls who are simultaneously adjusting to marriage, learning household management, and navigating relationships with their husband's extended family. Physical maturity becomes a significant factor in these arrangements. While Roman law technically permitted marriage at 12 for girls, most families waited until their daughters showed clear signs of physical development and emotional readiness for adult responsibilities. However, the definition of readiness was often more about family convenience than the girl's actual preparedness for marriage. The mentorship aspect of age gap Roman marriages was supposed to compensate for the power imbalances. Older husbands were expected to guide their young wives through the complexities of adult life, teaching them about social expectations, financial management, and cultural sophistication. In practice, this often meant the wife remained in a perpetually subordinate position, never developing independent judgment or decision-making skills. Regional variations in age gap marriage customs create interesting contrasts across the Roman Empire. Some provinces maintain traditions of closer age parity between spouses, while others favor even larger age differences than typical Roman practice. These regional differences reflect local economic conditions, social structures, and cultural values that influence marriage arrangements. The legal framework surrounding Roman marriage reflects and reinforces age gap relationships. Roman law gives extensive authority to husbands over their wives' legal and financial affairs, assuming that older, more experienced men are better equipped to manage complex legal and business matters. This legal structure makes it difficult for young wives to develop independence or challenge their husband's decisions. Second marriages often involve even more dramatic age gaps, as widowed or divorced men in their 50s or 60s marry teenage girls to produce heirs or strengthen family alliances. These arrangements can create households where the husband is old enough to be his wife's grandfather, leading to complex family dynamics when children are born. The psychological impact of these age gap marriages on young Roman women is difficult to assess from historical records, but some evidence suggests that many adapted successfully to their circumstances. Roman culture provided social support systems for young wives, including extended family networks, female friendship groups, and religious communities that helped them navigate the challenges of early marriage. Professional marriage counselors and family advisors sometimes intervened in problematic age gap marriages, offering guidance about managing household relationships and resolving conflicts between spouses with vastly different life experiences. These interventions suggest that Roman society recognized the potential problems in these arrangements while still considering them socially acceptable. The inheritance implications of age gap marriages create complex family dynamics. Young wives often outlive their older husbands by decades, potentially controlling significant family wealth for extended periods. This reality influences how families structure marriage contracts and inheritance arrangements, trying to balance the interests of multiple generations. Cultural attitudes toward age gap marriages vary significantly across different social classes in Roman society. Wealthy families might arrange marriages with larger age differences to maximize political and economic advantages, while poorer families might prefer closer age parity to ensure both spouses can contribute to household labor and income generation. By the time you've adjusted to your age gap marriage, you realize that Roman society has created a system that prioritizes social stability and economic security over individual compatibility or emotional connection. Your relationship operates according to rules designed by previous generations, with little consideration for whether these arrangements actually produce happy marriages or fulfilled individuals. Welcome to Roman age gap anxieties, where love is expected to develop within predetermined power structures that favor experience over equality. You thought Roman marriage was complicated enough with the age gaps and financial negotiations, but now you're discovering just how easily these supposedly sacred unions can dissolve. Roman divorce operates with a casualness that would make modern divorce lawyers weep with envy or terror. Welcome to a world where ending a marriage requires less paperwork than canceling a gym membership, but the social consequences can destroy families for generations. The legal simplicity of Roman divorce is almost shocking by contemporary standards. Either spouse can end the marriage by simply declaring their intention to do so, often with nothing more than the famous phrase, tuas res tibi habito, take your things with you. No court hearings, no waiting periods, no mediation requirements. Your marriage can be over before your neighbors finish their morning bread. But this legal simplicity masks a social reality that's far more complex and potentially devastating. While the law makes divorce easy, Roman society has very strong opinions about who should divorce whom, under what circumstances, and how the process should be conducted. Violating these unwritten rules can turn a simple legal procedure into a social catastrophe that affects multiple generations. The financial consequences of Roman divorce are where things get truly messy. Remember that elaborate dowry negotiation process you survived. Now it all has to be untangled, with assets returned, debts allocated, and future obligations clarified. The dowry must be returned to the wife's family, but calculating exactly what should be returned and in what condition often leads to bitter disputes that can last for years. Property division in Roman divorce follows complex rules that vary depending on the type of marriage contract you originally signed. In some arrangements, assets remain completely separate throughout the marriage, making division relatively straightforward. In others, properties have become intermingled in ways that require professional arbitrators to sort out fairly. These property disputes often involve entire extended families, as relatives who contributed to the marriage arrangements demand their interests be protected. The social stigma attached to Roman divorce depends heavily on gender, social class, and the perceived reasons for the marriage's failure. Men face relatively little social disapproval for divorcing their wives, especially if they can cite valid reasons like adultery, infertility, or failure to manage household duties properly. Women who initiate divorce face much harsher judgment, as they're seen as abandoning their primary social role and disrupting family stability. Serial divorcing becomes a particular problem among wealthy Roman families, where marriage and divorce cycles are used to form temporary political alliances and financial partnerships. Some prominent Romans go through multiple marriages like modern celebrities, creating complex webs of former relationships that affect their children's inheritance prospects and social standing. The children of Roman divorce face challenging circumstances that often determine their future opportunities. Custody arrangements typically favor the father's family, but the specifics depend on various factors including the children's ages, the reasons for divorce, and the financial arrangements surrounding the marriage's dissolution. Children might find themselves separated from their mothers permanently, raised by step-relatives, or shuttled between hostile households. Remarriage after Roman divorce is common and often necessary for economic survival, but it creates complicated family dynamics that would challenge even modern blended families. Your new spouse might have children from previous marriages, creating households where multiple sets of step-siblings navigate relationships, while their parents attempt to build new partnerships. The inheritance implications alone can create lifelong tensions between family members. The speed of Roman divorce and remarriage cycles sometimes produces absurd situations where families find themselves connected and disconnected from each other in rapid succession. Political alliances formed through marriage can be severed through divorce and reformed through new marriages within the same social season, creating diplomatic whiplash that affects entire social networks. Historians still argue whether the ease of Roman divorce actually strengthened society by allowing unhappy couples to separate cleanly, or weakened it by undermining the stability of family structures. What's clear is that the system created a culture where marriage was viewed as a potentially temporary arrangement rather than a permanent commitment. The religious aspects of Roman divorce are surprisingly limited, since marriage is considered primarily a civil contract rather than a sacred bond. While certain religious rituals might be performed during the divorce process, there's no requirement for religious approval or intervention. This secular approach to marriage dissolution contrasts sharply with later Christian traditions that would make divorce much more difficult. Regional variations in divorce customs create additional complications for Roman couples living in different parts of the empire. Local traditions might impose additional requirements or restrictions on divorce proceedings, while provincial governors might interpret Roman law differently than urban magistrates. These variations can trap couples in legal limbo when their circumstances change. The psychological impact of easy divorce on Roman society is difficult to assess, but some evidence suggests that the constant possibility of marriage dissolution created anxiety and insecurity that affected how people approached relationships. Knowing that your spouse could leave you at any time might have encouraged more careful behavior, but it also might have prevented deep emotional attachment and trust. Professional divorce facilitators emerge in Roman society to help couples navigate the complex social and financial aspects of marriage dissolution. These specialists understand property law, social customs, and family dynamics well enough to help divorcing couples minimize the damage to their reputations and financial interests. The documentation requirements for Roman divorce vary depending on the complexity of the financial arrangements and the social prominence of the families involved. Simple divorces might require nothing more than witness declarations, while complex cases involving substantial property or political implications might generate extensive legal documentation. Public relations management becomes crucial for Roman families dealing with divorce, as they must control the narrative about why the marriage failed and what it means for their future social standing. This often involves careful communication with extended family networks, business associates, and political allies who might be affected by the divorce. The timing of Roman divorce can be strategically important, as families might choose to end marriages during specific political or social situations that minimize negative consequences. Divorcing during major festivals or political campaigns might help bury the news, while timing divorce to coincide with remarriage announcements might soften the social impact. By the time you've navigated the Roman divorce process, you realize that the ease of ending marriages has created a society where relationships are fundamentally unstable and strategic, rather than emotional. The very system designed to provide flexibility and freedom has instead created a culture of you've survived marriage, potentially divorce, And now you're discovering one of the most openly acknowledged, yet carefully regulated aspects of Roman relationships: the complex world of extramarital arrangements. Welcome to a society where having a mistress is almost expected for wealthy men, where the rules governing these relationships are as elaborate as marriage law itself, and where everyone pretends not to notice the obvious contradictions in Roman sexual morality. The institution of concubinage in Roman society operates as a parallel relationship system that serves different functions than marriage. While wives are chosen for their social status, dowry potential, and ability to produce legitimate heirs, concubines are selected for personal compatibility, physical attraction, and emotional connection. It's as if Romans have divided the concept of partnership into separate categories, each with its own rules and expectations. Your typical wealthy Roman man maintains his official marriage for social and political purposes, while developing his primary emotional relationship with a concubine who might be a freed slave, a lower-class citizen, or even a foreign woman who cannot legally marry a Roman citizen. These relationships often last for decades and produce children who are acknowledged and provided for, though they cannot inherit full citizenship or property rights. The legal framework surrounding Roman concubinage is surprisingly detailed and sophisticated. Concubines have specific legal protections and rights, including guarantees about financial support, property ownership, and treatment of their children. These arrangements are often formalized through contracts that specify living arrangements, financial obligations, and procedures for ending the relationship. The social dynamics of Roman households that include both wives and concubines create complex family structures that would challenge modern therapists. Everyone involved must navigate relationships where emotional intimacy, legal obligations, and social expectations operate according to different sets of rules. The wife maintains her position as the official family representative, while the concubine might have the closer personal relationship with the husband. Female perspectives on these arrangements are difficult to assess from historical records, but some evidence suggests that many Roman women accepted concubinage as preferable to the alternatives. For wives, having a concubine might reduce pressure for constant intimate availability, while allowing them to focus on their official social duties. For concubines, these relationships might provide more security and autonomy than marriage to men of their own social class. The children of these complex arrangements face unique challenges in Roman society. Legitimate children born to wives inherit full legal status and property rights, while children born to concubines might receive financial support and acknowledgement without gaining full citizenship. These half-siblings often grow up in the same households, creating family dynamics that require careful management to prevent conflicts. Elite Roman women sometimes maintain their own extramarital relationships, though these are subject to much stricter social scrutiny than male affairs. Wealthy women might develop close relationships with male friends, artistic patrons, or intellectual companions that blur the boundaries between friendship and romance. These relationships must be conducted with extreme discretion to avoid damaging the woman's reputation and her family's social standing. The economics of Roman extramarital relationships involve significant financial obligations and opportunities. Maintaining a concubine requires providing housing, clothing, servants, and other lifestyle expenses that can rival the costs of maintaining a wife. Successful concubines might accumulate substantial wealth through gifts, business opportunities, and inheritance provisions that give them financial independence. Professional courtesans represent the most sophisticated level of Roman extramarital relationships, offering cultural refinement, intellectual companionship, and social sophistication that goes far beyond simple physical attraction. These women are educated in literature, music, and philosophy, making them attractive companions for wealthy Romans seeking stimulating conversation and cultural activities. The geographic mobility of Roman elites creates opportunities for maintaining relationships in different cities and provinces. A Roman businessman might have a wife in Rome, a concubine in his country villa, and informal relationships in various commercial centers where he conducts business. Managing these multiple relationships requires careful coordination and substantial financial resources. Historians still argue whether the Roman system of accepted extramarital relationships actually reduced adultery and divorce by providing sanctioned outlets for personal needs that marriage didn't fulfill. What's documented is that Roman society developed elaborate social codes for managing these relationships, while maintaining the fiction that marriage remained the primary social institution. The religious aspects of Roman extramarital relationships are complex and sometimes contradictory. While certain deities were associated with marriage and family loyalty, others were connected to passion, desire, and personal fulfillment. Roman religious practices included rituals and festivals that celebrated various aspects of human sexuality, creating a theological framework that could accommodate diverse relationship arrangements. Scandal management becomes crucial for Roman families involved in extramarital relationships, as they must balance social acceptance with potential reputation damage. The key is maintaining appropriate discretion while avoiding any appearance of undermining the institution of marriage itself. Public acknowledgement of extramarital relationships must be handled carefully to prevent social backlash. The aging process affects Roman extramarital relationships in ways that create additional complexity. Long-term concubines might gain increasing influence and security as they age, while younger relationships might be more unstable and temporary. Managing these transitions requires careful planning and financial arrangements that protect everyone's interests. International marriages and relationships create particular challenges for Romans living in distant provinces. Local customs might conflict with Roman social expectations, while distance from Rome itself might provide more flexibility in relationship arrangements. These cross-cultural situations often produce innovative solutions to the challenges of maintaining complex personal relationships. The inheritance implications of Roman extramarital relationships create complex legal situations that affect multiple generations. Children born to concubines might receive substantial informal support without legal inheritance rights, creating family dynamics where emotional bonds don't match legal status. Wealthy Romans often used trusts, gifts, and other legal mechanisms to provide for their extramarital children while protecting their legitimate heirs' interests. Professional relationship management becomes necessary for wealthy Romans maintaining multiple complex relationships. This might include trusted servants who coordinate communications between different households, financial advisors who manage the economic aspects of multiple relationships, and social consultants who help navigate the complex etiquette of Roman extramarital arrangements. The political implications of Roman extramarital relationships can be significant, as these personal connections often influence business partnerships, political alliances, and social networks. A successful concubine might serve as an informal advisor and social connector, helping her patron build relationships that advance his career and social standing. By the time you've navigated the complex world of Roman extramarital relationships, you realize that Roman society has created an elaborate system for managing human desires and needs that don't fit neatly into the institution of marriage. The result is a culture where official relationships serve social functions, while unofficial relationships serve personal needs, creating a parallel universe of romance that operates according to its own rules and expectations. Welcome to the world of Roman mistresses and side relationships, where love, law, and social custom create a complex web that few people can navigate successfully. You thought modern dating was confusing with its mixed signals and unspoken rules. Welcome to the bewildering world of Roman sexual expectations, where society somehow managed to combine Victorian-level prudishness with attitudes that would make a modern libertine blush. You're navigating a culture that celebrated sexual conquest in poetry, while demanding absolute chastity from respectable women. A contradiction so glaring it's amazing anyone managed to reproduce at all. Picture yourself as a Roman trying to decode the sexual rulebook. If you're a man, you're expected to be sexually aggressive and experienced, but only with the right people at the right times in the right ways. Slaves, fair game, prostitutes, obviously, foreign women, acceptable conquests. But touch a citizen's wife or daughter and you're facing exile, financial ruin, or a very angry husband with a gladius. The Romans had a word for acceptable male sexual behavior, virtus, literally meaning manliness, but it came with more conditions than a modern software license agreement. As a Roman woman, your sexual expectations are even more labyrinthine. You're supposed to be simultaneously alluring enough to attract a suitable husband, but chaste enough to avoid scandal. Too eager, and you're labeled promiscuous. Too reluctant, and you're frigid. The ideal Roman matron was expected to be sexually knowledgeable enough to please her husband, but virginal enough to maintain family honor. It's like being asked to be a gourmet chef who's never tasted food. The Romans developed an entire vocabulary around sexual propriety that would make a modern etiquette expert weep with envy. There was pudicitia, sexual virtue, which was considered one of the highest feminine virtues. But there was also libido, sexual desire, which was simultaneously celebrated in men and condemned in women. You're dealing with a society that carved phallic symbols on everything from bakeries to bridges, while clutching their togas in horror at the sight of a woman's ankle. Remember those dinner parties where you worried about proper conversation? Well, sexual topics were surprisingly common, but only if discussed in the right context by the right people. Poets like Ovid could write detailed seduction manuals, but a respectable matron couldn't be caught reading them without risking her reputation. It's like having a society where everyone talks about sex, but no one admits to having it. The concept of adultery in Rome was fascinatingly one-sided. If you're a married man having an affair with an unmarried woman or slave, that's just Tuesday. But if you're a married woman having an affair with anyone, that's grounds for divorce, financial ruin, and social exile. The famous Lex Iulia de Adulteris made adultery a criminal offense, but only for women. Male infidelity was considered a moral failing at worst. Female infidelity was a crime against the state. Talk about a double standard that makes modern dating inequality look quaint. Historians still argue whether Roman sexual attitudes were truly more liberated than we imagine, or if our sources, mostly written by elite men, give us a skewed perspective. The poetry and graffiti suggest a society comfortable with sexuality, but the legal codes tell a different story entirely. You're trying to date in a culture where the official rules and actual practice seem to exist in parallel universes. The Romans also had fascinating ideas about sexual positions and their social implications. Being the active partner was considered masculine and appropriate, while being passive was associated with femininity and potentially shameful for men. This wasn't just bedroom talk. These attitudes influenced everything from political rhetoric to social relationships. Calling someone passive was a serious insult that could end careers and friendships. Consider the bizarre Roman fascination with virgin brides. While men were expected to sow their wild oats, women were supposed to come to marriage completely inexperienced. But then these inexperienced women were expected to somehow instinctively know how to please their worldly husbands. It's like expecting someone to perform brain surgery after reading the instruction manual once while blindfolded. The contraceptive methods you encountered earlier become even more complicated when viewed through Roman sexual morality. Using birth control implied sexual planning, which was acceptable for prostitutes but potentially scandalous for wives. A respectable matron was supposed to welcome pregnancy as proof of her virtue, even if another child might bankrupt the family or kill her in childbirth. Roman sexual taboos extended beyond just adultery into realms that seem almost arbitrary today. Oral sex was considered more shameful than many forms of penetration, but only for the person performing it. Homosexual relationships were acceptable if you were the dominant partner, but potentially reputation-destroying if you were submissive. It's like playing a game where the rules change based on your position, social class, and the phase of the moon. The influence of Greek sexual attitudes complicated matters further. Greeks had different ideas about acceptable relationships, including the famous practice of pederasty that Romans both adopted and criticized. You're dealing with a culture that borrowed heavily from Greek models, while simultaneously trying to maintain distinctly Roman values, a tension that played out in bedrooms across the empire. You wake up to discover that Roman romance wasn't just complicated by social expectations and family politics. It was literally blessed, cursed, and choreographed by the gods themselves. Dating in ancient Rome meant participating in a religious performance where every kiss might invoke divine wrath, and every wedding required celestial approval. You're about to learn that Roman religion didn't just influence romance. It turned dating into a spiritual obstacle course that would challenge even the most devout modern believer. Welcome to the world of Roman religious festivals, where fertility and romance collided in spectacular public displays. The most famous of these was Lupercalia, celebrated every February 15th, which made modern Valentine's Day look like a church picnic. Picture yourself participating in this ancient festival. Half-naked priests called Luperci run through the streets of Rome, whipping anyone they encounter with strips of goatskin. But here's the romantic twist. Young women would actually line up to be struck by these bloody strips because it was believed to ensure fertility and easy childbirth. Nothing says "date me" quite like voluntarily getting whipped by sweaty priests in public. The festival gets even stranger when you consider the matchmaking element. Young men would draw names of eligible women from a jar, creating temporary couples for the duration of the festival. It was essentially ancient speed dating, supervised by bloodied religious officials. Some historians argue these pairings occasionally led to permanent relationships, while others suggest it was purely ceremonial. Either way, you're participating in a dating ritual that involves animal sacrifice, public nudity, and ritualized violence, making modern dating apps seem refreshingly civilized. But Lupercalia was just the beginning of your religious romantic obligations. As a Roman woman, you had to navigate the complex worship of goddesses who controlled every aspect of love and marriage. Venus, the goddess of love, demanded offerings and prayers but was notoriously fickle about granting romantic success. Juno, protector of marriage, required elaborate rituals, and was known to punish wives who didn't properly honor her. You're essentially dating with divine middle management breathing down your neck at every turn. The marriage ceremony itself was a religious minefield, requiring perfect execution to avoid angelic wrath. The bride had to sacrifice her childhood toys to the household gods, wear a specific style of veil blessed by the Vestal Virgins, and recite vows in ancient Latin that most Romans barely understood anymore. One wrong word or missed gesture could doom the entire marriage. It's like performing surgery while reciting poetry in a foreign language during an earthquake. Consider the role of augury in Roman romance, priests who interpreted omens to determine whether the gods approved of romantic decisions. Before any major romantic milestone, you'd consult these religious officials who would examine bird flights, lightning patterns, or animal entrails to divine celestial approval. Imagine having to delay your wedding because a chicken refused to eat grain, or canceling a betrothal because the augurs saw inauspicious cloud formations. Your love life was literally at the mercy of meteorology and poultry behavior. The Romans also developed elaborate rituals around the goddess Fortuna, who controlled luck in love. Women would visit her temples to pray for suitable husbands, leaving offerings of honey cakes and wine. But Fortuna was notorious for her capricious nature. She might grant your prayer for a wealthy husband but make him insufferably boring, or send you a passionate lover who's already married to someone else. You're essentially making wishes to a divine slot machine that usually pays out in monkey's paw scenarios. Historians still argue whether Romans truly believed in these religious aspects of romance, or if they were primarily social customs that provided structure to courtship. The evidence suggests a complex mixture of genuine faith and practical social organization. You're dealing with a society where religious ritual and romantic practice were so intertwined that separating them would be like trying to separate flour from a baked cake. The influence of Eastern mystery religions added another layer of complexity to Roman romantic spirituality. Cults of Isis, Mithras, and Cybele offered alternative approaches to love and sexuality that sometimes conflicted with traditional Roman values. Worshippers of Isis, for example, might observe periods of sexual abstinence that could disrupt normal courtship patterns. You're navigating a religious marketplace where different gods offered competing advice about romance. The concept of divine punishment for romantic transgressions loomed large in Roman consciousness. Adultery wasn't just a social crime. It was an offense against the gods that could bring divine retribution on entire families. Stories of lovers struck by lightning or transformed into animals served as cautionary tales about respecting celestial authority in matters of the heart. Your romantic choices carried cosmic consequences that extended far beyond personal happiness. Roman religious calendar dictated when romance was appropriate and when it was forbidden. Certain months were considered unlucky for weddings, while others were reserved for purification rituals that required sexual abstinence. The dies religiosi, religious holidays, scattered throughout the year created a complex schedule of romantic do's and don'ts that made planning a love life feel like solving a celestial puzzle. The practice of dedicating romantic relationships to specific deities added another layer of religious obligation to Roman dating. Couples might pledge themselves to Venus for passionate love, to Juno for marital stability, or to Diana for protection of their chastity before marriage. These vows came with, you thought dealing with Roman gods was complicated. Now you're facing the terrifying reality of Roman contraception, a collection of methods that ranged from merely ineffective to genuinely life-threatening. Welcome to ancient birth control, where the line between medicine and magical thinking was thinner than a papyrus scroll, and where preventing pregnancy might accidentally kill you faster than childbirth itself. Let's start with the contraceptive method that haunted your earlier adventures: silphium. This miraculous plant from North Africa was so effective at preventing pregnancy that demand literally drove it to extinction by the 1st century CE. The Romans loved silphium so much they put its image on coins and charged its weight in silver. But here's the catch: nobody knows exactly how it worked, and some historians suspect it might have been as much placebo as panacea. You're relying on a birth control method that was so successful it became impossible to obtain, like a renewable energy source that worked too well and depleted itself. The Romans developed a fascinating array of alternative contraceptive strategies that showcase their combination of medical observation and complete scientific ignorance. Women would drink mixtures of honey, cedar resin, and dates, a combination that sounds more like a dessert recipe than medicine. Others consumed lead-based compounds that probably prevented pregnancy by slowly poisoning the user. It's like treating a headache with a hammer, technically effective, but missing the point entirely. Consider the Roman obsession with timing as contraception. They believed women were most fertile immediately after menstruation, exactly the opposite of modern understanding. So Roman couples would avoid sex during what they thought were dangerous days, while enthusiastically engaging during the actual fertile period. You're using a contraceptive calendar that's precisely backwards, like trying to stay dry by seeking shelter during sunny weather while dancing naked in rainstorms. The physical methods Romans employed were equally bewildering. Women would insert wool soaked in honey, oil, or wine into their vaginas as barrier contraception. The honey might have had some spermicidal properties, but the wine was probably just optimistic thinking. Other women used crocodile dung mixed with honey, a method that was supposedly borrowed from Egyptian medicine. Nothing kills the romantic mood quite like explaining to your partner why you smell like reptile excrement and bee products. Roman men weren't exempt from contraceptive responsibility, though their methods were equally questionable. Some would drink willow tea before sex, believing it reduced fertility. Others practiced coitus interruptus, with varying degrees of success and satisfaction. There was also the bizarre belief that holding your breath during orgasm would prevent conception, a technique that probably caused more headaches than prevented pregnancies. The Romans also developed elaborate rituals around contraception that blended medicine with magic. Women would wear amulets containing specific stones or herbs thought to prevent pregnancy. Others would recite incantations while preparing contraceptive mixtures, as if the right combination of Latin phrases could convince their ovaries to take a vacation. You're essentially trying to control reproduction through a combination of chemistry, prayer, and wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether Roman contraceptive methods had any genuine medical effectiveness, or if lower birth rates among certain classes resulted from other factors like malnutrition, disease, or delayed marriage. Some plant-based remedies might have contained compounds with genuine contraceptive properties, while others were probably as effective as drinking water while standing on one foot. The social implications of contraception in Roman society created additional complications for your romantic life. Using birth control implied sexual planning, which was acceptable for prostitutes but potentially scandalous for respectable wives. A married woman preventing pregnancy might be accused of avoiding her maternal duties, while an unmarried woman using contraception was admitting to sexual activity. You're dealing with medications that were simultaneously necessary and socially dangerous. The Roman understanding of pregnancy itself was fascinatingly wrong in ways that influenced contraceptive thinking. They believed the womb could wander around the body like a lost tourist, causing various ailments when it settled in unexpected locations. Some contraceptive methods were designed to encourage the uterus to stay in its proper place, rather than prevent fertilization. It's medical advice based on the assumption that internal organs have the navigation skills of a drunken sailor. When contraception failed, which it frequently did, Romans turned to abortion methods that were even more dangerous than their pregnancy prevention techniques. These included drinking toxic herbal mixtures, violent physical exercise, or using implements that often caused fatal infections. The line between abortion and accidental suicide was disturbingly thin. You're dealing with medical procedures that were about as safe as playing Russian roulette with a crossbow. The economics of contraception added another layer of complexity to Roman reproductive choices. Effective methods like silphium were expensive enough that only wealthy families could afford them regularly. Poor women relied on folk remedies passed down through generations, a collection of techniques that ranged from harmless to lethal, with no reliable way to distinguish between them. Your reproductive choices were determined by your economic status more than your personal preferences. Roman physicians like Soranus of Ephesus wrote detailed treatises on contraception and gynecology, but their advice was based on theoretical understanding rather than systematic observation. They recommended everything from vigorous sneezing after sex to drinking cold water while holding your breath. These medical authorities spoke with confidence about subjects they understood about, as well as medieval astronomers understood black holes. The psychological impact of uncertain contraception on Roman relationships was profound. Couples had to balance sexual desire with economic reality, knowing that failed birth control could mean financial ruin or maternal death. Every romantic encounter carried potential consequences that could reshape entire families. You're trying to maintain intimate relationships while constantly calculating odds that nobody actually. You've mastered the complexities of Roman dating in the capital. But now you're about to discover that the empire's romantic rules became even more bewildering as they spread across the Mediterranean. From the Celtic forests of Britain to the Egyptian temples of Alexandria, Roman dating customs collided with local traditions in ways that created hybrid romantic practices stranger than anything you've encountered so far. Welcome to Imperial Romance, where your carefully learned Roman courtship skills might be useless, offensive, or illegal depending on which province you visit. Picture yourself as a Roman citizen stationed in Gaul, trying to court a local Gallic woman whose tribe still practices Druidic marriage customs. The Romans had supposedly suppressed Druidic religion, but romantic traditions died harder than political systems. Your potential bride expects a year-long engagement period during which you must prove your worthiness through feats of strength, displays of wealth, and approval from tribal elders who view Roman courtship as laughably weak. Meanwhile, her family practices bride price negotiations that make Roman dowry discussions look like casual conversations. You're essentially learning to date in a culture that considers Roman romance about as sophisticated as finger painting. The situation becomes even more complex when you consider how Roman divorce laws interacted with local customs. In Egypt, women retained significant property rights even after marriage, a concept that shocked Roman men accustomed to absolute patriarchal control. Egyptian wives could initiate divorce proceedings and keep substantial portions of family wealth, creating a dynamic where Roman husbands found themselves with far less marital authority than they expected. You're discovering that marrying across cultures might mean surrendering the very privileges that made Roman marriage appealing to Roman men. Germanic tribes presented their own romantic challenges that made Roman customs seem positively civilized. Germanic marriage involved elaborate bride kidnapping rituals that were partly ceremonial and partly genuine abduction. A Roman suitor might find himself expected to literally steal his bride from her family's stronghold as proof of his commitment and courage. Missing this step, or performing it too gently, could invalidate the entire marriage in Germanic eyes. You're trying to balance Roman legal requirements with barbarian traditions that treat marriage proposals like military operations. The religious complications of cross-cultural romance added layers of complexity that would challenge modern interfaith couples. A Roman Christian trying to marry a Celtic pagan had to navigate not just different gods, but entirely different concepts of marriage itself. Celtic hand-fasting ceremonies created temporary marriages that could be dissolved after a year and a day, while Roman Christian marriages were supposedly permanent. You're negotiating with families whose basic understanding of marital commitment operates on completely different timescales. Consider the linguistic challenges of imperial romance. Love poetry that sounded sophisticated in Latin might sound like clumsy nonsense when translated into Celtic or Germanic languages. Roman terms for romantic love simply didn't exist in many provincial languages, while local concepts of affection had no Roman equivalents. You're trying to express complex emotions using vocabularies that weren't designed for cross-cultural communication. It's like composing symphonies using only percussion instruments, technically possible but missing crucial elements. Historians still argue whether intermarriage between Romans and provincials was encouraged as imperial policy or merely tolerated as inevitable. Evidence suggests that mixed marriages were common among soldiers and merchants, but less accepted among the elite. You're dealing with relationships that might be celebrated in frontier towns, but scandalous in Rome itself. The economic systems of provincial courtship often conflicted with Roman expectations in fascinating ways. British Celtic tribes practiced complex gift exchanges that could continue for generations after marriage, creating ongoing financial obligations that Roman law didn't recognize. A Roman husband might find himself responsible for supporting not just his wife's immediate family, but distant relatives connected through ancient kinship networks. Your romantic decisions were creating economic relationships with people you'd never met in languages you couldn't speak. Sexual expectations varied dramatically across the empire in ways that could destroy marriages before they began. Germanic cultures that celebrated female warriors had very different ideas about appropriate feminine behavior than traditional Roman society. A Germanic bride might expect to participate in household defense and decision-making in ways that would horrify a conservative Roman husband. You're entering marriages where fundamental assumptions about gender roles were completely incompatible. The Roman legal system's attempts to standardize marriage across the empire created bureaucratic nightmares that make modern immigration law look simple. Different provinces had different requirements for valid marriages, and a union legal in one region might be void in another. Moving from Britain to Syria could accidentally invalidate your marriage, turning your spouse into a legal stranger and your children into bastards. You're navigating a legal system that was simultaneously too rigid and too inconsistent to handle the realities of imperial diversity. Local festivals and courtship rituals created timing conflicts that could disrupt Roman romantic schedules. Egyptian flood festivals determined when marriages could occur, While Germanic seasonal celebrations influenced courtship timing in ways that ignored Roman religious calendars, you might find your carefully planned Roman wedding conflicting with local taboos that made the ceremony impossible or offensive. The practicalities of mixed culture child rearing created ongoing conflicts that extended far beyond the wedding ceremony. Roman fathers expected absolute authority over children, while many provincial cultures gave mothers significant parental rights. Celtic children might be raised partially by extended family members. Germanic children could be fostered with other tribes, and Egyptian children inherited through different systems entirely. Your romantic choices were determining not just your own future, but creating complex cultural identities for children who might never fit completely into any single tradition. The dining customs you struggled with you've survived the bewildering maze of Roman romance, from crocodile dung contraceptives to cross-cultural courtship catastrophes. But your ordeal isn't over yet. The romantic disasters you've experienced weren't just ancient history. They were laying the foundation for Western dating traditions that continue to haunt modern relationships. As you reflect on your journey through Roman romantic culture, you're about to discover that many of our contemporary dating anxieties, wedding customs, and relationship expectations are direct descendants of the same contradictory attitudes that made Roman romance such a nightmare. Consider how Roman concepts of romantic love shaped everything that came after. The Romans were among the first to develop the idea that marriage should involve emotional attachment rather than just economic arrangement, but they never quite figured out how to balance passion with practicality. This fundamental tension, wanting marriages to be both romantically fulfilling and socially beneficial, became the defining characteristic of Western romance. You're seeing the birth of the impossible modern expectation that one person should be simultaneously your best friend, passionate lover, economic partner, co-parent, and soulmate. The Roman obsession with female chastity combined with male sexual freedom created double standards that persisted for millennia. Victorian morality, with its emphasis on pure women and experienced men, was essentially Roman sexual attitudes dressed up in Christian clothing. Even today's dating culture struggles with these inherited contradictions. Women are expected to be sexually available but not promiscuous, while men face pressure to be experienced but not predatory. You're witnessing the creation of sexual expectations that made logical sense to nobody, but somehow became foundational to Western culture. Roman wedding customs evolved into traditions that most modern couples follow without understanding their origins. The white wedding dress. Roman brides wore white as a symbol of purity. Wedding rings. Romans exchanged iron bands as symbols of binding commitment, walking down the aisle. Roman brides were literally transferred from father to husband in ceremonial processions. Even the honeymoon has Roman roots in post-wedding rituals designed to help couples adjust to married life. You're participating in ceremonies whose original meanings have been forgotten, but whose forms remain surprisingly intact. The Roman legal framework for marriage created concepts that still influence modern relationship law. Roman innovations like prenuptial agreements, divorce procedures, and property distribution during marriage dissolution became templates for Western legal systems. The idea that marriage requires state approval rather than just community recognition, that's a Roman concept. The notion that divorced individuals should be free to remarry, Roman innovation. You're living within legal structures that were designed to solve problems specific to ancient Mediterranean society, but somehow became universal principles. Historians still argue whether Roman romantic literature created our modern concept of passionate love, or merely reflected existing human emotions in new ways. Poets like Ovid and Catullus wrote about romantic obsession, jealousy, and heartbreak in terms that sound remarkably contemporary. Their descriptions of love as a form of madness, romance as conquest, and relationships as battles became the foundation for Western love poetry. You're seeing the literary tradition that taught generations of Europeans and Americans how to think about romantic feelings. The Roman emphasis on romantic correspondence evolved into the love letter tradition that dominated Western courtship for centuries. Roman lovers exchanged elaborate written declarations that established patterns still visible in modern romantic communication. The expectation that lovers should express feelings eloquently in writing, the idea that romantic correspondence should be preserved as precious artifacts, even the concept that love letters could be used as legal evidence. These are all Roman innovations that influenced everyone from medieval troubadours to modern texting culture. Roman dining customs shaped Western dating rituals in ways that seem obvious once you recognize them. The idea that couples should share meals as romantic bonding experiences, the expectation that men should pay for dinner dates, even the concept that food choices reflect personality and compatibility. These attitudes developed in Roman banquet halls and tricliniums. You're seeing the origin of dining traditions that made dinner dates the foundation of Western courtship culture. The Roman approach to managing extended family relationships during courtship created patterns that still plague modern couples. Roman emphasis on parental approval, sibling rivalry over romantic choices, and complex negotiations between in-laws established expectations about family involvement in romantic relationships. The stress you felt navigating Roman family politics during courtship wasn't unique to ancient times. It became the template for family drama that continues to complicate modern relationships. Roman concepts of masculine and feminine behavior in romantic contexts created gender role expectations that proved remarkably persistent. The idea that men should pursue while women respond, that masculine worth is demonstrated through romantic conquest, that feminine value depends on sexual restraint. These attitudes survived the fall of Rome, the rise of Christianity, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and multiple waves of feminist reform. You're witnessing the creation of gender scripts that proved more durable than the empire that created them. The Roman integration of religion and romance established expectations about spiritual aspects of love that influenced Western culture for millennia. The idea that marriages require divine blessing, that adultery is a sin against God rather than just a social transgression, that romantic love should involve spiritual communion. These concepts developed when Roman religious practices merged with Christian theology. You're seeing the foundation of romantic spirituality that made love sacred in ways that earlier cultures hadn't imagined. Roman attitudes toward divorce and remarriage created the framework for ongoing Western debates about relationship permanence. Romans developed the concept that marriage should be dissoluble when it became impossible, but they never resolved the tension between romantic idealism and practical flexibility. This ambivalence about divorce, simultaneously accepting it as necessary while viewing it as failure, became characteristic of Western attitudes toward relationship commitment. As you drift toward sleep, reflecting on your journey through Roman romantic culture, the candlelight flickers softly against the walls of your bedroom, casting gentle shadows that seem to whisper stories of ancient lovers long gone. The complexities of Roman dating begin to fade into dreamlike abstractions, their contradictions and complications transforming into the stuff of gentle slumber. The crocodile dung contraceptives become funny rather than horrifying. The family negotiations seem quaint rather than stressful, And even the religious requirements take on the quality of fairy tale rules rather than genuine obstacles. Your breathing slows as you realize that human beings have always struggled with the mysteries of love and connection, that the awkwardness of romance is as eternal as the stars themselves, and that somehow, despite all the obstacles and absurdities, people have always found ways to care for each other across the centuries. Sleep comes easily now.